A Kitsune in Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 22, Recovery and Reconciliation. Winter sighed as the doors opened, revealing Ospin's office occupied by the rest of the group. "He's asleep again," she announced, stepping tiredly into the room. Still weak from his battle, it had only taken Naruto 10 minutes to wear himself out entirely. She pilfered the scroll after taking him back to bed. Her written ninju was decent. She was definitely a better speaker, but she was able to make out the contents of the scroll. Suffice to say, it was totally understandable why Naruto had finally cracked. Hearing that 7 of your brothers and sisters in all but blood were killed for something out of their control, along with what was the last of your family. She wasn't sure how she'd react if even Whis was killed. She was closest with her out of her family. The room had a very somber tension too, of all the things to hear about the man's life. None of their expectations came even close. They were genuinely horrified. "So what happens now?" Pyra asked. She sat off to the side, head resting on her interlocked hands. Ospen sighed from his desk. "That depends entirely on our younger friend. What did the scroll say, Miss Schnee?" "I'm assuming you looked?" he asked, a mug of coffee left forgotten on the table. Winter nodded, showing the scroll in question. "The other savage and Jinchuriki were killed by the same people that came after Naruto, along with his godfather and mentor Jiraiya of the Sannin," she explained frankly. Several pairs of eyes in the room widened at the news. "That's awful. Why would they do that?" Ruby cried. The other Schnee shrugged. "The scroll didn't say, and I don't think Naruto will if he even knows. What it does pose is a massive security problem, however," Aspen spoke up. "If the Akatsuki are looking for people like Mr. Uzumaki, and if he is the last one, that means they'll be coming here likely in force. That's bad. Naruto was clearly struggling against just 2 of them. Who knows how many more are in this organization?" Blake pondered, her bow twitching erratically. "I don't believe Naruto was using his fullest capability while we were treating him. We detected a foreign entity in his blood system," Aspen continued. "He was poisoned?" we shrieked. "And he was still that powerful?" "The power a Jinchuriki wields is nothing to scoff at, Whis," Winter scolded. "We have nothing here on Remnant that even comes close." "He's a monster," Yang whispered hoarsely. "Yang!" Blake hissed. "You all saw it. The man leveled half force, and you said that wasn't even his full power. Who knows how much destruction he could cause if he let loose? He is literally holding a demon inside of him," the blonde yelled in her defense. The response came unsurprisingly from Ruby. It was the exact response that was surprising. She simply walked up to her sister and slapped her hard. Yang held her cheek in both shock and pain, her aura not instinctively activating. "I can't believe you," Ruby yelled. "After everything he's been through, after everything he's done, you still accuse him of something he's not. You're not better than the village he's told us about." She gestured in the vague direction of Blake behind her. "Or those that hate fondness for no reason." Yang gaped at the swift rebuke from her younger sister, never having expected such a hostility from her. "Ah." She tried looking towards her partner for support, only to receive a shake of her head and a disappointing look. She looked down at the ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered before fleeing the room in a hurry. Ruby looked torn for a moment, ultimately shaking her head and staying put. It was Whis that stepped forward next. "I'm sorry as well." She glanced at Winter. "I'm still trying to shake off the mindset of my father. I may have judged him too early." "Whis, it's okay," Ruby comforted, stepping closer. The younger Schnee resolutely shaking her head. "No, it's not. I treated some people so badly, even you, Ruby," she explained, almost close to tears. "And you don't anymore, Whis," Pyra calmed, stepping forward. "You have grown since we first met from, admittedly, a rather bratty child." Whis couldn't stop the snort of laughter escaping at the Spartan's frank description. "Yes, I suppose I have you all to thank for breaking me out of that, and him for showing me there was more to those that were native to the elemental nations," she hummed. "And this is how I thank him. I mean, he didn't look exactly phased earlier until that scroll turned up, Nora pointed out. Besides, if we take what he said into consideration, I'm sure he's heard a lot worse than whatever you and Yang could have said, Ren added helpfully. That doesn't make it right, Wiz exclaimed, throwing her hands up in annoyance. Perhaps not, Blake intervened, but that doesn't mean you're the scum of Remnant now. You have to accept that sometimes you aren't perfect, Weiss, she concluded. Weiss opened her mouth to argue further, but apparently thought better of it and simply nodded in resignation. Ruby patted her consenting on her head with a mutter of "Good girl, you're already learning," bringing out a pale blush to the girl's cheeks. Blake sighed heavily, bringing attention back to her and away from the Schnee. "Why bother trying to hide when the secret is out?" she muttered more to herself than anyone else. "Blake?" Ruby asked curiously. Instead of answering, the girl in question hesitantly reached up to her bow and untied it, revealing her two cat ears to those in the room. The only Winter and Crow seemed mildly surprised. There was a general sense of support coming from the rest in the office. There was the squeal, and the newly revealing Faunus barely had the thought to brace herself before Ruby trashed into her chest. "I'm so proud of you," she squealed happily, trying her hardest to crush her teammate between her arms. Fear forgotten, she gradually hugged her back. Blake felt a laugh bubble through her at the infectious nature of the excitable team captain. "Thank you, Ruby." "Yes, indeed." Osmond smiled behind the stippled hands. "But I think it's time you started thinking about the Vital Festival, don't you think? There's a mere week before the opening games," he explained. Blake frowned as she separated herself from Ruby. "How are you going to compete, though? Kitsune won't be allowed." As if summoned, the elevator pinged again, and the doors opened, revealing an orange-haired girl in a green dress, grinning brightly. "Salutations!" she greeted loudly, arm throwing into a mock salute. "Penny!" Ruby squealed happily at the sight of the synthetic android. "You're our new teammate?" she questioned, sipping closer in a blaze of petals. "Affirmative. Headmaster Ospin contacted General Ironwood before his unfortunate death, and his steed Intern General Schnee assigned me as your stand-in teammate." She grinned brightly, still Ruby imitating her with another squeal. "Yes, in any case," Osmond continued, "you'll be teaming with Penny for the duration of the Vital Tournament in lieu of Kitsune. She'll be returning to Atlas at the end of the festival. No, off with you. I believe you have somewhere to be. No?" Naruto had found his particular grove a week after arriving here at Beacon, when he was still exploring the school and its expansive grounds. It was towards the rear of the school, where a small forested area sat before the cliff edge, facing Forever Fall Forest in the distance, and the pale blue of the sea beyond even that. He sat cross-legged, still in his Ambu uniform, just passively gathering nature chakra from the area. Not enough to go full sage mode, but to purge the remains of the poison from his system. It also helped to extend his senses further than before, searching for any other Akatsuki pairs looking to capitalize on his weakened state. Thankfully there were none, but he hadn't made it this far without being somewhat careful. In the meantime he scribbled in his seal notebook. Most of, if not all, seal masters had one, while his blade lay beside him on white cloth, freshly cleaned. Jiraiya said he was great at passive seals, but needed to work on more combat-oriented sealing. Battle sealing, it was called, a difficult description to learn within Fuinjutsu, especially since you needed to be both fast and accurate with your seals, or come especially prepared for any confrontation. The Uzumaki in particular were brilliant at it, but then they were brilliant at anything Fujitsu related. The war had admittedly tunneled vision him with regards to sealing. With Jiraiya he only learned the basics before were recalled. Then it was just the jutsus to deal a lot of damage in a small amount of time, only beginning to discover the secrets behind the horizon when things were starting to look particularly grim. Even now his heart wasn't in it, his thoughts lingering and wandering in all the wrong places. You think after all these years he'd be used to loss? Not to mention this sort of news must have been kept from him for some time. The Akatsuki members were small and they already traveled in pairs. Who knows how long this had occurred? Paul arrived as if he'd just been in a battle, and perhaps he had. Perhaps they knew being a toad summoner, they couldn't hide the death of his sensei and just decided to reveal everything they were already hiding. Wasn't a great policy to have with both their highest rankings and most powerful shinobi outside the five Kage. Even then, he almost wasn't good enough. Without the fox, the combination of Itachi and Kisame had almost laid him low. Okay, he came out on top in the end, but he had to pull out on most of his trump cards in the end to finally get ahead. What happened and when more than two shows up next, or when their leader, as apparently he was the last Jinchuriki now, he growled in annoyance, briefly losing control of the nature chakra and expelling a small wave around him. The fox had been quiet for a while now after their initial chat when he woke up, and he didn't try to communicate with him either, recepting his desire of quiet at the time. He too desired it. He naturally noticed the missing scroll when he reawoke and was just waiting for the shitstorm to appear, but it was thankfully distant for now. Bringing a hand to his eyes, he rubbed the dryness away, erasing the error he made in the seal while he was distracted. He paused once more before continuing. His ears twitched as a twig snapped in the background, followed by a quiet curse. "Come out, Yang!" He beckoned, returning to his seals, scribbling out in an idea of a chakra shield. The bushes rustled behind him, and the blonde stepped out, looking a little worse for wear. "Hi, Kitsune," she greeted warmly, sending an awkward wave. Naruto paused in his drawing, glancing over at his teammate. Yang was many things, but awkward was not one of them. He eyed her tense posture and unwindness to meet his eyes. "What is it?" he questioned, snapping his notebook shut. "Me? Nothing. Why would anything be wrong?" She rubbed the back of her neck as she avoided the question entirely, already turning to leave. "Yang," he said tersely, giving her an eye. The other blonde seemed to fight herself over what to do before visibly crumbling in front of his eyes. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, dropping to her knees. Actually startled, Naruto took a second to react, sweeping the younger girl into his arms and pressed her head into the crook of his neck. What are you sorry about? Tell me," he whispered smoothly. I'm sorry about everything, how I treated you when we first met, and just now, I didn't know," she continued, sobbing. "You have nothing to be sorry about, Yang. You didn't know, and I had hoped you wouldn't ever. My past is not something I try to forget. I but it's also not something I share willingly," Naruto explained. "But I said such terrible things," Yang wept into his shoulders. "When?" he probed softly. "Earlier, when you read the scroll, I said you were a monster. I didn't mean it, I promise. I was just so scared." She thankfully finally seemed to be calming down somewhat. Naruto chuckled slightly. "Yang, you are not the first to say such things, and you most definitely are not going to be the last. Nor are you going to be the first I forgive for saying things you didn't mean," he reassured. What?" she questioned, daring a glance up at the shinobi. "Do you really think I was going to hold something as little as that against you?" He flicked her forehead in amusement. "Baka," Yang stammered as she tried to think of some sort of response, only making Naruto smirk wider. She eventually gave up and pouted, punching the other blonde petulantly in the chest, which broke the dam and caused Naruto to chuckle. They were silent for a moment, but of course it had to be ruined at some point. "How are you, though?" Yang asked, pushing herself up and sitting in front of the older boy. Unprepared, but knowing the question was coming eventually, he released a deep breath and leaned back against the tree in thought. "I don't know," he answered truthfully. "You don't know?" Yang's confusion was evident. "War is hell, Yang. I've lost people before, but there was never enough time to process it. It was all kill them, destroy that, defend this, day after day. There was never a break long enough to relax, never long enough to think about what had been lost," the shinobi explained softly. "But now, you can do nothing but think," Yang released. Naruto pursed his lips. "In war, in battle even, you build bonds with those around you, special ones that normal civilians can never replicate. The bond between brothers in arms are unbreakable. The seven of us had a bond even further than that. The Biju." He hummed in agreement, quietly staring at the trees for a moment, deep in thought. "Our suffering was great, but through it we became better. We understood each other's burdens as easily as walking. There are some things that cannot be replaced. Yang stayed silent this time, just watching Naruto in pity. He thought about all the troubles they had been through, together and apart. Not only them, but he thought of all those he'd lost before and after becoming a shinobi, and how much they'd probably hate him for being such a gloomy bastard. Despite himself, he snorted in amusement, making Yang look at him curiously. A strange sense of peace overcame him in that moment. "Life," he began slowly, "sucks," Yang supplied unhopefully, and Naruto smiled sadly. "Is a gift." He turned away from the trees and looked to the teen in the eyes. "It offers us the opportunity and privileges to give something back by sometimes something more." He spoke. "That was our mission. We had been given the duty to hold the Biju, so we made it ours to be the best we could with the hands we'd dealt. Not to mention, I know several of them would hit me for being so miserable." He smirked, and Yang smiled back. "Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it's called the present," he quoted. "Where's that from?" Yang questioned. "A monk. He lived before even the Warring Clans era, and his name has been lost to time. But even now his words still live on. I'm not one for philosophy, but that quote has always stuck with me," he informed. "Kitsune, found you!" The interruption came from the tree line, and Ruby came barreling out and into Naruto's still tender ribs. They went down in the tangle of limbs, and a minor grunt of pain from the blonde. The younger girl propped her chin up on his chest and smiled cheekily. "Hi!" Naruto cocked an eyebrow and just patted her on the head, letting his own drop back onto the grass when it appeared that the girl wasn't moving anytime soon. "Hello, Ruby. The rest of you may as well come out. You can't hide from me," he sighed. The rest of their troop exited the trees at a more sedated pace than the young captain, moving towards the new trio with clear apprehension. "How much did you hear?" he questioned. "Not much, only the final bits," Winter answered, stepping close and sitting beside the shinobi, the action not going unnoticed. "Okay, and why are you here?" "We found you missing in your bed," and Ruby panicked. "We just followed behind her," Blake answered, sitting beside Yang to reassure her there were no hard feelings. "I see," he muttered in return. "You're not wearing your bow?" Blake flitted her ears in reply. "You said it yourself. Why bother hiding?" Naruto grimaced. "That's not what I meant," and Blake only shrugged in response. "How are you exactly?" "We heard the last of your words, but that doesn't really give us a good idea," Blake asked. "Fine. Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, emotional," Whis uncritically commented. Naruto snorted in amusement. "That works, I suppose," he sighed deeply, just processing. "Understandable," Ren spoke up, with Nora nodding along. "That's why we're here, to help." Ruby cheered, lifting her body off his chest. "My dad says no one suffering should ever be alone. That's what friends are for." "Thank you, Ruby, but that's not really how that works." "Don't care." She plopped back down on the shinobi's chest, producing another grunt. "You're really not getting out of this," commented Winter with a smirk. Naruto just looked at her with a knowing look. After a short period of silence he sighed deeply. "I am sorry that I didn't tell you anything, but I was under strict instructions to not say anything. I mean, what was I supposed to say? Oh, hey, I forgot to say, I'm the largest the killer remnant has ever seen since the Grim, and I carry a demon inside of me that can level mountains with a swipe of its tail." He huffed in annoyance. He shook his knowing all attention was on him again. "I never intended to make friends while here. Didn't think any of us would connect. Besides, I had lost many friends by this point, thanks to the war. It just wasn't worth it in my eyes." Ruby shifted on his chest, moving herself up so that she was tucked underneath his chin, snuggling in with a content sigh. "Well, tough. You're stuck with us now," she murmured. "Why? Aren't you afraid of me?" he questioned incredulously. "Oh, absolutely terrified. We saw what you did to that forest," Yang remarked. "And yet we got to know the man before the mask," Pyra affirmed. It doesn't help to know that the bloody fox is just some ramen-crazed teenager, Ren stated next, causing Naruto to snort once more. He smiled and closed his eyes, moving his arms around the girl on his chest and tugging her closer still. Thank you, he murmured. I don't know what to do next. I don't want to go back because I've been lied to, but if I stay, the Akatsuki will only come after me again. They aren't the only two in the organization, and not even the strongest. Then we'll be ready, Pyra said firmly. The shinobi scoffed. You're overestimating both yourselves and underestimating them, he remarked. Then train us, Yang proposed. Make us ready. That's also not that simple, he sighed in annoyance and sat up, careful of Ruby. You're two differences type of soldiers. You fight the grim mindless, mindless beasts. I kill people. Get what I'm going at? You can't train us because our opponents differ too much. You wouldn't be training us to fight. You'd be training us to kill, Ren theorized. Correct. Looking at their resplendent faces, he sighed and muttered under his breath, making Ruby in his arm giggle slightly at the comment. But that doesn't mean I can't help you, he amended. What do you mean? Are you going to give us a super secret training regimen to turn us slowly into super secret assassins? Nara gasped. Naruto coughed. No, let me think of something, but for now, quiet time, off you go. He pushed, lightly patting Ruby when she initially refused to move. She went with a pout of protest, but didn't resist when Whis took her arm and dragged her off. As their backs disappeared into the underbrush, the easiest surrounding him shifted. The mask he'd once again put on disappeared. Winter shuffled into view on his right side, a sharp look in her eyes as she stared him down. How are you truly? You can't trick me so easily as you did them, she probed, her frown deepening when Naruto wordlessly shook his head. Accepting his wishes for silence rather than pushing him, she instead grabbed at his shoulders, gently maneuvering him down so his head rested in her lap. Stalking the pads of her thumbs over his whiskered cheek, the blonde grasped at the jewel around his neck in quiet contemplation. What Winter, in the meantime, glanced over at the blade left alone off to the side. Time heals all wounds, as they say. Some just took longer than others. She'd wait as long as it took. It was a little nerve-wracking being among so many people again, but Ruby had insisted on watching their match from the crowd. However, sandwiched between Winter and Team Periwinkle, alleviated some of that anxiety. She must admit, though, watching the fights occur rather than being a participant was a breath of fresh air. It had been a full week since his showdown with the Akatsuki and his unveiling of the true Kitsune. Things at first had been tense. He initially refused to sleep back in the dorms, camping out in the woods until all three of his teammates literally dragged him back in. In the build-up at the beginning of the Vital Festival, he had briefly trained them in the days leading up to now. It wasn't much, but not a lot could be done in a mere week's time. Team RBY plus Penny, he didn't think there was a color with that letter combination, so it stuck. They were working together well. Pyra commented beside him as his team battled one from Haven in the opening round. Being the opening fight of a tournament such as this was not an opportunity to be squandered, and his team were battling well, but the team from Haven wasn't going down without a fight. Penny had gelled well with Ruby, Yang, and Blake. Likely being an android meant she was able to adapt her fighting style easier, but it mattered not. Blake had just knocked one of the opposing students out of the ring when his e-scroll buzzed in his pocket. Taking it out, he frowned at the words appearing on the screen below Ospin's name. What is it? Winter asked next to him, noticing the movement out the corner of his eye. Naruto sighed, getting up. Aspen wants to see me. If I'm not back for the end of the match, tell them I'll meet them in the fairgrounds afterwards. He imparted, getting a nod from both the Shnee and Para. He left the stands and made his way to a bathroom, going into a stall and flashing away back to the school, appearing in his dorm room. From there, it was easier to simply sunshin up to Aspen's office and let himself in through the window. Aspen, he greeted as the headmaster looked up from his display. Kitsune, or would you prefer Naruto? I don't believe we've had a chance to actually talk since your overnight stay in the infirmary. He he greeted back, turning off the computer, instead picking up a scroll and chucking it at the shinobi. Here, this came for you. Kitsune is fine for now, he replied, easily picking the scroll out the air and opening it. He grunted at the contents. What? The Gokage have decided to grace us with their presence. They're on their way here and will be present with the other delegates, he informed, throwing the scroll back to so Aspen could check the contents himself. Oh, that's interesting, the headmaster commented, looking over the words. He looked back at the blonde. You're not pleased? No, Naruto answered, but didn't elaborate. Aspen didn't press. I suppose I'll have to tell General Shnee to make arrangements and increase security. He admitted instead. She's official now? Indeed, just this morning. Good for her. Ospen's monitor beeped, interrupting anything further from being said. The headmaster turned to it and activated the interface. It seems like your team is doing well. They've progressed to the next round. Naruto smiled beneath his mask. Good. I'll go meet them in the fairgrounds then. Headmaster? Kitsune? And with that, he disappeared out the window. Okay, everyone ready? Naruto yelled to all his clones assembled around him. At his feet sat a simple scroll with a complex seal matrix. The principle was rather easy. Erect a barrier around an area and keep things out of that area. The trouble that came with the seal was that most barrier seals were large to contain the vast amounts of chakra to keep people out, and there were usually four of those seals. In his attempt to create a personal shield, he had condensed all that into a single network small enough to fit on one of his vaporses. In theory, it should work. However, with that much chakra condensed into a single seal, he needed to test it out, which is why he was now taking cover behind an actual barrier seal. He nodded at one of his clones who prepared an explosive kunai and threw it towards the scroll on the ground. A bluish transparent barrier sprung to life in a dome-like shape around the scroll. The tag detonated on contact. He immediately wasn't sure what happened to the scroll, but the kunai was reflected back at the poor clone at 3 times the speed, and he turned into a cloud of smoke. He blinked. Write that down, he commented, turned to another copy as the smoke cleared. The shield was gone, but so was the scroll. Initially, he thought that the bearer failed and the tag destroyed the scroll. However, as he studied the scorch marks on the ground, they were heading away from where the scroll was, suggesting that it was the barrier itself that destroyed the scroll and not the explosion. Not a good outcome either way, and would require more tweaking to make sure he didn't remove an arm should he use the barrier. In the meantime, come on, Blake, he called, dispelling the clones, and taking his notebook with the notes written out, he read through them briefly as the fauna stepped through the tunnel to the locker room. Should you be in bed? He questioned, glancing up at her ears still proudly on display. I would ask the same of you, but I already know the answer, she replied with a small smile as she stepped closer. Can I talk to you about something? She asked. Naruto snapped shut his notebook and gave the girl his full attention. Sure. Blake took a few seconds to formulate her question before she answered. Shinobi are sort of mercenary, correct? She inquired apprehensively. The man in question shifted his posture slightly as a strange query. Of sorts, yes. Why? Do you take contracts on people? Was the next weird question, and Naruto was thoroughly thrown off at this level of questioning. He folded his arms and fixed the girl with a pointed stare. Blake, what's this about? I'm not assassinating someone for you. Blake once again floundered for an answer, this time not coming up with one. Realizing her predicament, the shinobi wrapped an arm carefully around her midsection before shunching to the roof. Okay, what's the real issue? He pushed, setting her down. Blake sighed deeply. I had someone very dear to me change. It wasn't in an instant, it was gradual. Little choices that began to pile up. He told me not to worry. At first, they were accidents, then it was self defense. Before long, even I began to think he was right. But you're not him, she began slowly. Were you involved? He asked gently. The faunus nodded singularly, regretfully. I joined the White Fang at first because I thought Adam was justice. Then I thought he was passion. But over time I realized I was wrong. He wasn't any of those things. He was spite, not hatred, not rage. Spite. He won't accept equality, only suffering for what he feels the world did to him, and his way of thinking is dangerously contagious. I came to Beacon because I ran away from him. He had turned into something I could have never imagined. Why are you telling me this? Blake turned fully to Naruto, slipping around the wall until she was shoulder to shoulder with the shinobi. I want to trust you. I do trust you, no matter who you are really. Adam leads the White Fang. He is dangerous and he will try something soon. I need you to swear to me if he endangers Vale. Beacon, anybody. You will kill him. She stared into the blonde's eyes with the determination he had yet seen from her. Naruto, in turn, didn't hesitate with his response. I swear. End of chapter 22.